There is always something interesting when we discuss language. One of them is language change, a phenomenon by which permanent alterations are made in the features and the use of a language over time. Mostly, this language change occurs in pronunciation, meaning, and vocabulary. Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Group 9 here consists of Albi Awal, Gian, Riski, Rahman, and Muhamad, Ramadan, Saputra. In this video, we're gonna talk about language change in sociolinguistic. Before we move any further, let me show you the topic that will be discussed in this video. First, variation and change. Second, how the change spread. Third, how do we study language change? And the last is reason for language change. Anyway, without any further ado, let's move on to the first topic, variation and change. In general, what we should know is that the possibility of a linguistic change exists as soon as a new form develops and begins to be used alongside an existing form. If the new form spreads, the change is in progress. If it eventually displaces the old form, the change has become a fait accompli. Earlier in this video, we know that language change occurs in pronunciation. For instance, the th fronting in British English. They change the th with f, like thank you become thank you with f. The second is meaning. For example, the meaning of word nice is actually precise at the first place. So when we say we have a nice holiday, it also could mean that we have a precise holiday. And the last is the vocabulary. For instance, some people used to say really good with word wicked. On the other hand, language also varies in three major ways. First, over time. Second, in physical space. And the third, in a social context. Furthermore, all of them are interrelated. The next topic, we will discuss two examples of language change phenomenon. That is the post-vocalic R and the spread of vernacular forms. Post-vocalic R. In many parts of England and Wales, the standard English has lost the pronunciation of R after vowels in words like star and card. The loss of post-vocalic R has begun in the 17th century in the southeast of England, but areas at the southwest of England are pronouncing the post-vocalic R. The change, however, is moving slowly towards the west. The accent of post-vocalic R are called rhotic. In England, rhotic accents are described as rural and uneducated. However, in USA, it is extensively used. Many US accents are rhotic. A research made in 1960 found out that rhoticism is regarded as prestigious in New York. It was used by the young people of the upper middle class in their formal and casual speech, which indicated that it is spreading. However, Eastern England is generally non-rhotic. This linguistic variation proves the fact that complexity of variation and language change, as well as the arbitrariness of the forms that are regarded as prestigious to some communities and bad to others. The next is the spread of vernacular forms. Vernacular pronunciations also spread in speech communities. A linguistic survey made in 1950 in Martha's Vineyard showed that the community uses the vernacular forms of the earlier generation to mark itself from the tourists or visitors to the island. Speakers change their pronunciations to seem more conservative, that is associated with the area in the past. Even if this pronunciation has died out, it was used to express solidarity and loyalty to the rural values of the place. Therefore, they pronounced words like light as close to light and house as close to house. The people of Vineyard unconsciously valued the feature of vowel centralization in their speech. Therefore, this linguistic variation proves the fact that how a vernacular feature can acquire social significance and covered prestige. The next topic is coyness and coynization. This thing happens when people who speak different dialects come into contact in monolingual communities. Therefore, a new dialect or variety emerges. This language change process is called coynization, and the result is a coyn, a variety which is the result of dialect contact. Both linguistic and social process contribute to the emergence of a coyn. Linguistic process involve different types of simplification. One of these is known as leveling, a process that eliminates marked variance. Leveling results in the coin adopting fewer forms than the range of forms in the source dialects. For example, if people who speak dialect with post-vocalic R come into contact with people who do not, leveling generally leads to the disappearance of post-vocalic R in the coin. This thing happened in large parts of England as described above. But, of course, linguistic factors alone cannot explain everything. Social factors are relevant too. So, if the people who speak the dialect with post-vocalic R have more prestige for some reason, then the R is more likely to survive and be adopted into the coin. The R may be associated with belonging as a local in a particular area, for instance, in which case it will survive as an identity marker or a symbol of local identity. Another linguistic process associated with coyness is the simplification of different features or categories. Where two groups of speakers from different dialects areas come together, the simpler forms will usually win out. So, when dialect speakers who make the distinction between he was swimming and they were swimming meet dialect speakers who don't make this distinction, example, they say both he was swimming and they were swimming, then the process of simplification suggests that the simpler form will survive. Using only was is simpler than changing from was to were with different pronouns, and this has been the result in many areas where English is spoken. Just the was form is used with all pronouns in many English dialects. Again, however, social factors are relevant. People tend to accommodate the speech of others if they like, respect, or admire them. Local prestige and relative status are very relevant factors. So, they were swimming will only survive if the group of people who use these forms belongs to an admired and respected group in a community. So, they were swimming will only survive if the group of people who use this form belongs to an admired and respected group in a community. On the other hand, if the form they were swimming becomes associated with a lack of education, it will disappear. Socially stigmatized forms tend to disappear in communities where status and education are valued. Conservative forms tend to disappear in areas where being hip, fashionable, and innovative is valued. Last but not the least, in brief, language change happens over time. This language change is done by the user or the speaker itself, which is called speaker's innovation. And this language change is also governed by social and physical circumstances. In this case, sociolinguistic study of why particular change spread and how they spread. So that's all from me. Now let's move on to the next topic.
As an object in sociolinguistics, language is not seen or approached as language, as is done by general linguistics. However, it is seen or approached as a means of interaction or communication in human society. Every activity in human society will not be separated from the use of language. Therefore, the formulation of sociolinguistics given by experts will not be separated from the problem of the relationship between language and social activities and aspects. In society, A person is not seen as an individual that's separated from others. Instead, we are seen as the member of a particular social group. In this sense, language and language usage are not observed individually, but are always linked to activities that exist in society. Everyone has different ways of using their language. We can see the differences in terms of intonation, choice of words, sentence structures, and how to express the idea and so on. The first one is group changes. Many linguists have used the metaphor of waves to explain how linguistic changes spread through a community. Any particular change typically spreads simultaneously in different directions, though not necessarily at the same rate in all directions. Social factors such as age, status, gender, and region affects the rate of change and the direction in which the wave rolls most swiftly. Moreover, in any speech community, there is different sets of wave intersect. We belong simultaneously to a particular age group, region, and social group. For the example, a child learning slang at school and using it at home. This language change moves naturally at different speeds in different groups depending on the acceptability of the language change. In other words, a change may spread along any of these dimensions and into another group. Linguistic change infiltrates groups from the speech of people on the margins between social or regional groups, via the middle people who have contacts in more than one group. In this case, teacher is a person who have many contacts from different social groups. And second, language changes can spread through the style to style. One theory of how a change spreads presents the process as a very systematic one. In the speech of a particular individual, it suggests that the change spread from one style to another, for example, from the formal speech to more casual speech, while at the same time it spreads from one individual to another within a social group, and subsequently from one social group to another. When a change is a prestigious one, it usually starts at the top of the speech community, in the most formal style of the highest status group and spread downwards. For example, if we want to trace the spread of the post-vocalic R in New York, we will find it first happening in the most formal style of the highest social group in the community. It then moved to the less formal style of the group, and simultaneously, it also spread to the most formal styles of another groups, until it reaches the speech of the people of lower social groups. The change gradually spreads from style to style and from group to group till it reaches completion. Regarding to this phenomenon, Labov also observed differences in pronouncing R by middle-class social groups who tend to be more hypercorrective in pronouncing R with more precise pronunciation, also by males than females. Women began to pronounce R more clearly as did men, indicates that lower social class has accepted a formal style of language. And the last is from word to word, or lexical diffusion. It seems to be the case that sound changes not only spread from one person to another, and from another style to another style. They also spread from one word to another. Sound changes typically spread through different words one by one. This is called lexical diffusion. When a sound change begins, all the words with a particular vowel don't change at once in the speech of a community. According to Chambers and Trotgill, lexical diffusion is a kind of diffusion that occurs from one word to another by showing changes or innovation in the sound to change the word structure or phonotactics of the previous word. So, it can be said that lexical diffusion is an element of language innovation that spread from one lexical to another. The diffusion of elements of language innovations, including lexical diffusion, directs the language elements through which the diffusion passes to uniformity or convergence. As diffusion passes from one word to another, this uniformity occurs gradually. For the example, It words cancel out the sound at the beginning, middle, and at the end of the word. In Indonesian, there are 10 innovative parts that show the removal of the initial consonant plus sound a syllable which experiences lexical diffusions. There are ponakan from keponakan, paya from papaya, timun and mentimun, and so others. In other words, lexical diffusion as a linguistic phenomenon can be observed in language or its variations. To observe lexical diffusions, it is necessary first to observe lexical innovation or updates in a language or its variation because the lexical diffusion process is a continuation of language innovation in society.
How do we study language change? First, parent-time studies of language change. The parent-time studies are the method in the study of language change. The method is about comparing the speech of people from different age groups between younger and older people, because it can be a useful clue to an understanding of language change. Moreover, differences between the speech of older and younger people are interpreted as indication of change in progress. Younger speakers tend to use more of the newer or innovative forms, and the older speakers use more of the older conservative forms, or usually the forms they adopted in their own teenage years. For some case, I discovered one day that my 11-year-old son, David, didn't know what the word wireless meant, neither did his friends. On the other hand, my great-grandmother never heard the word radio, and while grandmother knew what a radio was, she considered the term newfangled. My mother used both wireless and radio to refer the same object, and though I understand both terms, I have always used radio for preference. This case tells us that the normal pattern for standard or prestige form was that people use more of them in their middle years. Their frequency is low in adolescence and declines again in old age. So when a standard or prestige form, such as a radio, occurs more often in the speech of younger people than older people, this suggests that it's a new form which is being introduced and adopted by young people. The second, language change in real time. The parent-time method of studying language change is a useful shortcut for sociolinguists who generally cannot afford to wait around for 20 years to see what happens in real time. However, sometimes it is possible to build on the work of earlier linguists when studying change. It means dictionaries which provide the date when a form was first noted can assist in tracing change in vocabulary over time. In other words, reviews a study done in real time, also known as a very reliable method of identifying change. So, when of interesting real-time study was reported by Peter Treadgill, who returned to Norwich 15 years after his original study of the speech pattern of Norwich people. He discovered that some of the variation he had noted had led to linguistic change, as predicted. For instance, the vowels of beer and bear, which were still distinct for many speakers in 1968, had completely merged by 1983 for all speakers except those from the highest social group. These changes were identified by comparing a sample of people in 1968 and another similar sample 15 years later. Reason for language change. First, social status and language change. Members of the group with most social status tend to introduce change into speech from neighboring communities that have greater status and prestige in their eyes. Upper classes tend to speak standard dialects. Middle classes sometimes speak standard or non-standard dialects. Lower classes tend to speak non-standard dialects. For instance, how the use of language of a British royal family as upper class, the office working class in the cities as the middle class, and factory workers as a lower class. The second is gender and language change. Differences in women's and men's speech are another source of variation which can result in linguistic change. Sometimes women are innovators in leading a linguistic change, and sometimes men too. The only difference is that women tend to be associated with change towards both prestige and vernacular norms, whereas men more often introduce vernacular change. One of the examples is like in Belfast. The same pattern recurs. Women are leading change towards the standard, while men are introducing new vernacular variants. And the last is interaction and language change. Interaction and language change can gain prestige from the media. The fact that a form is used in the vernacular speech in the city is probably another factor contributing to its prestige or attractiveness to the ears of young people in other places. For instance, vernacular London speech on TV is generally seen as more desirable than speech of other cities. The influence of the media may again explain the speed of the change may help promote positive attitudes to the form in advance of its adoption. But most sociolinguists still think that actual change in people's speech require face-to-face contact with real people.